Happy politics, and welcome to, well, if it isn't yours, it's at least my favorite political podcast, BC Poly Hot Stove. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
It's Jordan Bateman, VP Communications for the Independent Contractors and Business Association. This is my second favorite podcast. My first is The Strategist out of Alberta.
Oh, there you go. And before we get into the weeds on any issues, a follow-up from last week. Got a note from one of our biggest fans, whose name may or may not be Jody Vance, saying that it's an excellent cue because you're holding up your student council dad. I referenced the mug that Ian had made me, and I did not show it off, so I am showing. That's the wrong direction.
Very nice, very nice.
Can you see does that show up? It probably doesn't show up. There's too much glare here.
No, I see it. It's looking good. Oh, I like how nice job writing on the handle too. Well done, well done.
Yeah, he's 5. Anyway, so yeah, this will never have liquid in it. It's going on my desk and it's staying there. So, you're welcome, Jody.
Yeah, we're like little Richard Zussmans, you know. He puts up his kids' pictures behind him and throws them in as cheap content for Global's political coverage. And now we are just, nakedly pandering to the same everyone loves Zussman crowd. I got to tell you a story about the Zussman used a household really quickly. My wife, Jenny, she is a single mom services coordinator for YWCA Vancouver, does real work with amazing people to help folks, to help single moms. And I guess News 1130 wanted someone who works with single moms just to see, how employment numbers are bouncing back, because obviously some have bounced back, but not for that. So Jenny got interviewed by someone from News 1130 named Lisa, who was very nice, but my wife was very upset it was not Lisa, who is one of her favorites.
There you go. We're dropping names like flies here today.
That's right. We'll tag them all and just think of all the hits we're gonna get.
Well, we should start with, Jordan and I email each other in the morning before we record saying, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? And today, the first thing we're going to talk about was not in that email, because this just happened an hour or so before we started recording here. It's about 11:30 on Tuesday. Ontario is going back to a state of emergency and lockdown measures they haven't been in since, earlier last year. Closing stores at 8 p.m. Non-essential travel is essentially prohibited. It's not a curfew like they're having in Quebec, but this is still, man, I did not watch the briefing live. I've seen clips. The fear you can see, it's palpable in Premier Doug Ford and others. He used the words, the hospitals are close to being overwhelmed. He used those words. That's scary.
So are they closing? I was in a meeting, but are they closing, is it essentially what we had in the spring, where they're closing down stores and shops and offices?
All non-essential business retail, which basically means everything that's not groceries, etc., drugstores, have to close by 8. There's no late night big box shopping, which I guess has been a problem in Ontario. Grocery stores are still allowed to be open at that time, and thank God, because that's when I do all my grocery shopping with a small child. I don't know what I would do. But the biggest change is that all non-essential workers must now work from home on penalty of big fines. And so if you don't have to go in, you are prohibited by law from going in. And this is going to extend into February.
So this is a significant economic story for British Columbia, because Ontario, as much as we loathe Ontario, especially the Maple Leafs and the Senators, as much as we loathe Ontario being the center of the universe in Canada, as much as we loathe Toronto as a major media market in Canada, they are, there's no doubt, the economic engine of this country. We have, if you haven't been to Toronto and worked there in business or taken a look, you have no concept as to the scale of what happens in Toronto and in Ontario in general. This will have a negative effect on the BC economy. This will have a negative effect on the Canadian economy, and it's terrifying. They had 3,000 new cases yesterday. I think probably they're even more concerned about this UK variant that's running around. By the way, a little hypocritical of us. We call it the UK variant, we call it the South Africa variant, but everyone piled on the China virus at the beginning, remember? So it's a little crazy on all that, but whatever. We're past all that now. Those were the good old days of talking about COVID. Now we're a year into this mess. But this UK variant, they had 8 cases yesterday. If it's running wild now.
It's up to 14, but their health officer, whose name escapes me, I apologize, she said that the number is, in actuality, much higher, and it's only the 14 they've caught so far. And I think that's probably the single biggest contributing factor as to why they're launching into what are very extreme measures. And they're not being done lightly. You can tell that just from the tone, but man.
Is it a glimpse into our future here, you think?
Well, it could easily be. I mean, there's no reason. We already have seen a handful of the UK variant here, and if it gets out of control. Now, I think that our measures have tended to be more successful here for whatever reason, and we could talk about that for the entire show. But it would not be informed. It would just be informed guessing.
Yeah.
It's a very long way of saying I hope not.
Yeah. I mean, so much of this is luck, and so much of our the reason we're a little different than Ontario right now is I think we had a lighter first wave.
Yeah.
We had a warm summer. We have warmer temperatures, not as many people have to go outside or go to other places and interact indoors. So we have all these little built-in advantages. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I think we were luckier. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, we were very lucky in how it unfolded for us. Now, though, our numbers have come back down slightly. But Dr. Henry doesn't seem any less, I was going to say terrified. Terrified's the wrong word, because I don't think she's scared of it. But
no.
Any less
aware.
Or any more pessimistic, right? Like she,
yeah.
And so, I don't know. The funny thing about the Dr. Bonnie press conferences now is so many of us have seen so many of them that we think of her as, in our lives, like we think we know her. And so we read into her emotions, and we read into every flicker, we read into every quivering voice moment. Like, how many times have you gone through the comments of, the global live coverage and Dr. Bonnie's getting emotional, it's like we think we know her. We don't. Let's be clear, we don't know her. She's a public figure. We see her a few hours a week on this, and we did have her Dr. Bonnie's Good Times guide. But other than that, we don't really know her. So we got to be careful about reading into her body language, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there have been times where, her voice is quivering and you can tell there's something afoot. But, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's all just vanity for us to suppose we know exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Or, I mean, in her home. We have no idea. I mean, there's a million things that plays into people's moods and how they're doing that day.
Yeah. Now, that said, I'm going to disobey that rule and read into her comments a little bit here. So, at a recent press conference, like 1 or 2 or 3 ago, I can't remember what, she really kind of pushed back on critics. Like, I know we're being there's a lot of criticism. And it was very clear that this is a person who wasn't elected to this job. Didn't really choose, sure, she became the chief health officer, but she never in a bazillion years dreamed that this would happen, right? Like, she'd be a public figure in the way she is now. But showing just a little bit of sensitivity to the fact that she's getting criticism. Now, in the spring, we had New York Times glowing articles, CNN, she's the hero of the pandemic, John Fluvog's shoes, people knitting, putting quilts and sending them to her. Like, she's been named a life member of every organization. She's a woman of distinction. She's like every honor that you could possibly accolade you could put on her, she got in the spring and summer. Now things are a lot rougher number-wise. Not as rough as Ontario, but a lot rougher. And the criticism's coming out, especially on rapid tests, especially on keeping schools in. And now on the space between doses of the vaccine, where, for a response that claims to be science-based, she's swimming upstream against the science a little bit on how long between doses she wants to go on the vaccine. And there are no studies really conclusively that show that waiting 35 or 42 days in between is better or okay or whatever. In fact, the WHO, and we can talk about their record on this again, but the WHO has come out and said, no, 28 days, that is what you should be doing. Maybe you could stretch it, a few days past that, but really do it do the 2 doses in 28 days. She's swimming upstream on there, and that's drawing a lot of criticism as well from the epidemiologist crowd.
Yeah, I mean, and the other criticism you didn't mention that to my mind, or at least from what I can tell on Twitter, that's been the most sort of persistent has been the lack of sharing information across demographic lines. There was a good piece this morning on, why they're not sharing racially based data on COVID-19 and some of the good information that might come from that. And so I that stuff isn't going away. All that said, you do have to acknowledge the fact that, I read a story over the weekend in New York where they were literally throwing away doses of COVID vaccine that were expiring because they couldn't get people in who met the criteria for the first wave, and they were prohibited from just giving them to anyone.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's
that's stupid. That's stupid. Yeah, that's stupid. However, I will say today Cuomo announced everyone over the age of 65 can now be vaccinated. So it seems like they've corrected that. Israel is already at 20% vaccinated. Their whole population, 20%. And they'll be fully vaccinated probably by the time Benjamin Netanyahu has to go up for re-election, I'm betting. Which brings us to Canada. Today, Trudeau announced that Canada secured 80 million doses for this year of Moderna and Pfizer. The problem is, Maclean, no timeline as to when they're going to be delivered. We all have to have 2, so we need all of this. And just, late last year, he was saying, oh, no, we have 400 million doses coming. Well, it's more than enough, and we can spread it around, and everyone can get it, and then we'll give it to everyone else and third world countries. What happened to the 400 million? And, the longer this goes on, the more you realize, every province, you take New York, they had too much for the infrastructure they had. We have too much infrastructure for, the doses we have. And this is, Dr. Bonnie wants to get these into people's arms. We all do. The problem is you got to actually have the vaccine. We trusted Trudeau to get on this. It's clear we're not at the head of the queue. We're maybe in the middle. Not a great. Once everyone's vaccinated and we start to look back on this whole situation, and there'll be a royal commission and all sorts of lessons learned. My suspicion is the speed of the speed of how we acquired the vaccine will be a significant recommendation to improve.
Oh, absolutely. It's fun. I almost said fun. It's not fun. It's interesting watching the tension of competing interests that's happening when you see, news conferences with the Prime Minister, because there is every indication they're thinking about pulling the trigger for an election this year. But, and if that happens, it's not going to be next week. They're not that crazy. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen over the summer or possibly very early fall, much as it did here. They cannot call an election while Quebec is under curfew.
No.
They cannot call an election, today when Ontario goes back into a state of province-wide emergency. So, I have been seeing some pushback on social media saying, well, no, that's not happening. There's not going to be an election called today. You're right. There isn't going to be an election called today. It's January. Yeah. Even in the best of times, you wouldn't get an election called today. Yeah. But they're giving every appearance, including shuffling out ministers for no reason other than they're not running again, which is not something you do in the middle of your term. This is very much looking like we're going to have a federal election, July, August, September?
Yeah, I believe you are correct. This will thrill my Stuco president, who turns 18 in May, and will be going to her first election. So she's already lobbying for this election to come in June so that she can. But no, you're right. The other thing you didn't mention is who would be able to stand up to Norm Spector's withering obsession with elections during pandemics. Trudeau doesn't want to do that for the next 10 years of his regime. Yeah, you're right. This Doug Ford decision today, I think, kills election calls for at least a month or two. But April, May, you can see it.
Possibly. I tend to think it'll be more sort of August, September, if only because they'll be that much further along the vaccination. But also, even if there was no vaccine, we are likely to be in a better place after a few months of hot weather in the summer. Even with nothing else going right, it's a respiratory disease. Hot weather is better. And so I think all things being equal, I'd say September is probably what they're looking at. I could be wrong, but that'd be my take.
Yeah, which does explain some of the conservative criticism that's come out now over the handling of the pandemic. They've got to turn the tables sooner than later as far as support for that government. Can I touch on one more thing about vaccine just really quickly?
Yes, please.
So one of the very first groups to get the vaccine, and rightfully so, judging by some of the outbreaks that have been going on, are a number of Indigenous bands on reserve, people living on reserve. And it makes sense. Most of these are in rural areas with very little access to healthcare. Most of them have a very communal living situation style. totally understand that, very much support it. The problem is work camps. So on the weekend, the Toronto Star Vancouver, which is an oxymoron, the Toronto Star Vancouver came out with this long piece written by the folks at the Narwhal, which I'm not sure why, that's an interesting journalism model, but okay. And essentially said, Dr. Bonney was right to shut down work camps on the 5 major industrial energy projects in BC, but she was also wrong because it's too late. The wet sweat, and there's already been an outbreak in these number of things. The problem is, not to critique other people's journalism because it's not my job, but whatever. The Narwhal quotes a number of people, all of whom have been opposed to these 5 energy projects from the very beginning in a number of formats, in a number of places. And it's not really, I'm going to let you in a secret, Maclean. Their objections aren't really about the COVID, and it's not even really about COVID transmitting in communities around it. It's about the projects themselves. All that to say, with the vaccine, great. Okay, you've opened the door now, Narwhal folks. Perhaps the vaccine then, perhaps the solution here for these major projects of economic importance and national infrastructure importance, maybe the solution is to begin vaccinating people who are living in communal settings such as work camps sooner. So you vaccinate the First Nations around it. That's great. But maybe the work camp folks should be vaccinated next, or at a higher priority than perhaps they already were. So that would be my suggestion to Dr. Bonney, who has already said that people living in communal settings should be in the first batch, in the first stage. Work camps are obviously a communal setting. Perhaps they should be vaccinated as well in order to protect the community. There are ways around this besides just scuttling the energy projects, which has clearly been the agenda of a lot of these people.
I can't disagree. I think that as a communal setting like a work camp, there's obviously a higher risk if it does get in there. And we've seen that happen. Yep. And so, to me, it sounds like that would be the logical way to go. Have you heard anything to that effect, that might be something that's in the pipe?
No, in fact, we have 19 groups, according to this article, who have written just saying, just shut it down completely forever. That is not realistic. Even shutting it down, to the summer, there's prep work that needs to be done in order for the summer construction season. So that's not a great thing. To put into context, her order right now limits 400 people I think it's 400 people can work on the Coastal GasLink pipeline. That pipeline stretches from Fort St. John in the far east of British Columbia all the way across the Prince Rupert on the far west. 400 people on, what is that, thousands of kilometers, 1,500 kilometers or something like that. That seems a bit much, right? That is a pretty strong restriction. That means you're gonna have work camps that are essentially ghost towns, just a few dozen people in them. It makes more sense to, let's try to find a different way to this. The vaccine, the fact that living in communal settings seems to make more sense to me, but we'll see what the folks at the Ministry of Health and Public Health Officer says.
Yeah, well, and hey, there have been people who are very vocal about wanting to, shut down restaurants, pubs,
schools.
Exactly. And so, to me, this is your point about motivation is well taken, but to me, this sounds more of the same. There are always going to be people who think that the answer is to shut down everything, and we'll just wait it out, and it won't come back, and somehow we'll all keep feeding ourselves. Dr. Bonney and the provincial government, to their credit, have taken a more moderate approach, and I hope that your words of wisdom with regards to communal settings, to me that sounds logical.
Yeah, no, I agree. So we'll see. Look, it's tough. Everyone wants it. Everyone wants this vaccine. I understand that, but quoting, there's a Dr. David Bowering. He's a former chief medical health officer at the Northern Health Authority, quoting him as if he does not have a complete agenda against these pipelines is very disingenuous. This is someone who actually protested the pipelines, supported blockaders who illegally held the Morris Road as a ransom. A long history of fighting these kind of projects, not because of medical reasons, but because he philosophically disagrees with it. That should be mentioned in stories like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a backdoor.
Yeah.
Another big story this week that I will preface this by saying that there was a briefing and announcement yesterday, and I did not have a chance to pour through the numbers. So there is more stuff coming on the site later this week if you're interested in the subject, and that is BC speculation tax. But as of now, 11:50 a.m. on Tuesday, other than reading the release, I have not had a chance to dig through the numbers, and for that, I apologize. That said, it's raised $88 million, and the provincial government is patting itself on the back. I mean, it's a very popular tax.
Yeah.
Polls show that people like it. However, numbers also show the price of housing is continuing to go up. There was a good article in the Times Colonist this morning, which is one of a couple articles I read on this. Again, not having a chance to dig through the numbers myself, saying, look, a number of industry associations in terms of things like real estate, saying it's not really moderating the price of housing. So, maybe more is needed. Maybe more and different action is needed on that front, and which probably should start with more supply.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I represent a construction association. It won't surprise you to believe or to know that we would like to see more homes being built. The speculation tax is a fascinating case study, right? Because it's a tiny amount of income in the overall scheme of government, $88 million.
Yeah.
Now, I would note they had anticipated $200 million. They have fallen well short of that. I'd be curious what it costs to collect that $88 million. What is actually the pure profit to a government out of this tax? Because it seems to me it would be onerous to collect and to enforce. At the Taxpayers Federation in my old days, we had a little saying about taxes like this, that, in a neighborhood where everyone has a red door, a tax on blue doors is very popular. And it's always easy. It's always, taxes on other people are always more popular. But, there are some numbers here that we should examine, right? Like, of the $88 million, $11 million was paid out by Canadians. I'm not sure those are the speculators we are looking for, right? Like, a Canadian owning a property here in the Lower Mainland, is that really speculation if they're Canadian? $6 million came from British Columbians. So this would be the second home people, I guess. Again, $6 million bucks, not a huge amount of money, but this tax was never supposed to be collecting from British Columbians. That wasn't the promise. But it has become very politically popular because it sounds right? Speculation tax, tax on foreign owners. We've just gone through a cycle, we've just gone through a year here where, I haven't seen the immigration numbers. I imagine they're very low given the COVID situation. Certainly haven't seen a lot of investment coming into the province. Don't think a lot of buildings started selling suites this year. My suspicion is foreign investment was at an all-time low in the housing market. Not an all-time, but at a recent low in the housing market in 2020. Prices went up. We're in the middle of a money laundering commission, the Cullen Commission. There's more focus than ever before being put on the effect of illegal money flowing into the housing market. Prices went up. So you're kind of like, okay, well, why are prices going up if we're removing these foreign owners? We have a speculation tax. We have an empty homes tax in Vancouver. They're being double taxed for that. Prices went up. So you sit back and go like, if you're looking at this, like, what does the science say, which is what does the numbers say, you'd be like, is this actually achieving the goals we set out? Now, I'll let you know a secret. When Carol James brought in this tax and or first commented on this tax, she didn't set any goals. Like, there were no goals like to reduce, like, we want to increase rental rates or vacancy rates by X%, or we want to see number of units or whatever. She studiously avoided any kind of goals, any kind of criteria for how this would be judged, precisely because it was a popular tax and she didn't really care how it was going to be judged. It's a popular tax. That's how it's judged. We get reelected. That's a bit problematic. So, wealth taxes are such a hot button issue for us normal people who don't pay them. Can't really imagine a situation where we would be paying them. It is.
I can imagine it.
I can imagine, yeah, what a world that would be. But they're very popular in the kind of everyday British Columbian thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're effective or that they're correct or that the science bears them out.
it was presented as kind of, it's not a great comparison, but like a sin tax, in that it was presented not so much as a revenue stream that was going to be there, indefinitely and reliably, but I mean, I think Carol James has even asked this at one of the briefings, is that, in the best case scenario, does the tax revenue, speculation tax revenue, does it go down to zero? And she to be honest, I don't recall her answer, but that was the point, is that it's there to penalize a behavior that they portrayed as driving up the cost of housing. And I'm sure it did to some small extent. So it's kind of like, taxing cigarettes, 4 times the amount that people are actually paying retail. It's designed to stop you from smoking. The spec tax is the same way. It was designed to stop, foreign ownership and second homes and all that. And if the revenue keeps going down, then you're right. Yeah. The goals were never the point. The point was to try and stop this behavior.
Yeah, and they play with some numbers in their reporting, right? Oh, wow, rental availability went up 7%, but that means the rental rate went from like 1.1 to 1.2, which could just be a statistical blip.
Yeah, not 7 percentage points.
No, exactly.
Yes, I did see that.
No, totally. So, that's a bit problematic. They also said this money would go to constructing social housing in those places where they were collected. No doubt some of it has, but they don't provide an accounting of that. So it just kind of does go into this abyss. I would point out too, in the scale of government, this is about $7.5 million a month of revenue. By clawing back the COVID disability top-up, they're saving $30 million a month. So it's a tiny piece of the overall revenue pie.
Yeah.
But they collect $88 million. No one's going to sneeze at $88 million. They get the goodwill of the public feeling like something's being done to grind these guys. And, I just would be interested in kind of deeper analysis from folks who have a better understanding of investment and real estate and those kind of issues. I'd be curious what their actual analysis of the success of this tax is.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to hazard a guess, where the tax has been successful is in symbolism. It's symbolic.
Yeah.
It's not generating a mountain of revenue, and as you say, the housing prices are still going up. So what it is kind of a symbolic thing. And there's nothing wrong with symbolism. And again, polls say it's popular, but is it having a palpable effect on the market?
Yeah.
It's hard to see how.
Yeah, look, if I was running for the leadership of the BC Liberal Party, I wouldn't be putting in my platform that we're going to repeal this tax.
No.
I think it was in the platform, in Wilkinson's platform, I'm not sure. I don't think anyone's going to vote solely based on that, but it is a sign like, we're the party of the rich people, which of course is not true. The BC tax regime needs a complete overhaul just in general, at least some sort of look at it. Like, are we taxing appropriately? Are we taxing for the goals that we have, which is revenue, government services, and other things? But I'm not sure speculation tax would be singled out in that. It's such a minor tax, like $88 million, $7.5 million a month for a province that's spending $55 billion a year.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the other hot button and very sensitive subject in the last 7 days? And that is, of course, the lunacy that we saw in Washington, D.C. I mean, I don't want to compare it to anything because it's its own thing. And, I have been in protests, but they're not, I don't think they would have anything, they would have looked or felt like anything like what happened in Washington, D.C., where, I mean, there was a real sense of menace. I saw the video of them overwhelming, the security guards on the outside of the Capitol, and, a couple of people died. Words kind of fail me when I talk about this. This is something that, even though it had been predicted, and in fact, Donald Trump kind of said it explicitly that he was rallying people to do it. I'm going to betray my own naivety here, and I didn't think it was actually going to happen in numbers like that. I thought it would be a couple hundred idiots waving flags on the grounds outside, which would have been fine. It's a stupid protest, but it's a protest, and Deanie Moore, I thought, wrote a great piece sort of reflecting on, is it possible for something like that to happen up here? Maybe we shouldn't let our guard down.
Look, it was disgusting. It was abhorrent. It was awful. It was kind of terrifying to see, they bill themselves as the world's greatest democracy under attack like that. It worries me about maybe it might have been 1812 the last time a government institution in the States has been under attack like that, right? Like this could have easily turned into an Oklahoma City situation.
Yeah.
I've seen comparisons to 9/11. I don't agree with that comparison necessarily, but like this was a traumatic event. My experience of it was a little different. Like I was in meetings all day. I come out, my wife has texted me and she says, I know I said I was going to be off Twitter for January, but obviously because of today, I've broken my rule. I'm like, oh, today what's happened, right? Like, is he died, And then I went on, and then there was this flood of information. And you're appalled. Like, it's appalling. It's disgusting. I think it's important to say it wasn't everyone who went for that rally, but they were certainly incited. There's like this weird wingnut, disgusting faction of people, white supremacists, abhorrent to everything that is right and just in the world. They kind of swarm in. We have seen in the past, like Vancouver has seen Stanley Cup riots. We do know that normal humans sometimes get swept up into that.
Yeah.
That's not an excuse. Normal humans should not be swept up in it, but we have seen it.
Yeah, I mean, I saw pictures of a couple of the protesters wearing shirts and slogans that I'd never heard of before that day, which was I hate to even saying it out loud. It's like 6MWE, which stands for 6 million wasn't enough. That's in reference to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
What can you even say to that? It's just, I'm almost tearing up just seeing it. It's just, what the hell?
Yeah. I mean, where was the protection for that building, right? Like, we had when I was on council in Langley, we had a guy we had a restraining order against, and there was a fear that he would come in and attack council. So for a while, we had a police officer sitting at council meetings, and then for a long time, we had a security officer just kind of keeping track, making sure, right? Mm-hmm. Where was the protection for these folks? Like, this is what kind of boggles my mind. This is not some far-flung outpost of the empire, right? This is Washington, D.C., the Capitol building. Why you knew they were coming? Why weren't you prepared? Now, what bothers me is it's gotten. It started to get messed up into this whole cancel culture stuff now, and so people now are ascribing things to these protesters that wasn't ever there. This protest wasn't about cancel culture. It wasn't about deplatforming people. This was about white supremacy, disgusting hatred for the democratic institution, and violence, and all this. And
just refusing to accept losing an election, which is, that's some banana republic shit, you guys. Yeah. I mean,
yeah. It's awful, and I do worry. I think we're 185 hours away from a new president. If I was
that's 8 days, yeah.
If I was Biden, I think I would probably push for an indoor, small-scale inauguration, partly for security, but partly just to try to look different than this craziness that has gone on. Every political movement has adherents, disciples, people on the fringes who are batshit crazy, for lack of a better term, who have disgusting beliefs, and it's so hard to cleave them and get rid of them. The one thing I don't like right now is Adam Vaughan is the worst offender for this, the federal Liberal MP in Toronto area. He's trying to ascribe to Canadian Conservatives the same values as these white supremacists in the United States. And okay, yeah, there are white supremacists in Canada, absolutely. There is not the same kind of Canadian Conservatives are very different than American Conservatives. Canadian Conservatives, other than the very fringe most conservative people I know, don't oppose public health care. Do not want to storm the House of Commons. Do not feel there is a very different Canadian sensibility to this. So yes, there are the fringes and the people who feel, I don't even know what they feel, because they claim to feel disenfranchised, but they also feel superior. So I'm not sure how you can have both. But I'm not going to look for logic in the white supremacy movement ever, because they're insane and should be expunged. But Canada, I find Canada a little different. I think of the Wet'suwet'en protests. Richard Zussman clambering up the side of the wall. I don't think anyone felt. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if your reporters felt in danger. I don't know if anyone felt like they were going to be murdered for going to work there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone felt like their life was in danger. You know, I mean, there was
If they did, Richard
it
wouldn't be
wasn't
climbing up the
pleasant.
wall.
Don't get me wrong, and there were some assaults, but I that wasn't why they were there. Do you know what I mean? Like those things that happened were a few individuals that let things get out of hand, but they weren't there. Even if you disagree with the cause, they weren't there to hurt anyone. They weren't there. They certainly weren't there to kill anyone. And so, I mean, I'm not going to say that you can't compare, because did I enjoy that day? No, I did not. But I never thought that I was in like actual mortal danger. Not once, not for 1 second.
Yeah. No. Okay. That's good. So, you know, there are ways. Protest is part of life. Like protest is part of the democratic process. Sometimes we do it better ways than others. You know, the Olympics had the protest bubble zones. I think David Eby wrote the book on how to do it there. You know, but that's good. It has to be secure. I just think of, like, I was in Washington once, you know, walk that National Mall. It's so beautiful. It's so amazing, all the different museums and institutions, things that you've seen on CNN your whole life, or you grow up and see. I just think of that, the far end of that is Abraham Lincoln in his chair looking out across to the Capitol, and that's what's going on. The party of Lincoln, you know, people who claim to be part of the party of Lincoln, they're not, but they claim to be, you know, in that. It just, you know, you can almost imagine a tear coming down his face, right? Like it was that shocking and disgusting. And I don't know. The one little bit point is, there's been a lot of comparison for 9/11, like this should be a uniting thing for America. There's a big difference between 2001 and 2021, and that is fragmented media and social media, where you have, like, most of us had the same experience with 9/11. You know, you woke up, if you're on the West Coast, you woke up, the Today Show was on, or NBC or CNN, and you watched over and over again the planes flying in on replay, the tragedy was going, but we were all hovered around TVs. That was how we got our news of that, right? And it was 4 or 5 different channels. And so you experienced that together. And everyone had the same clips. Everyone had the same, you know, information. You know, one outlet would get a, you know, grainy video from someone, you know, and it would immediately be shared across all the platforms. Like everyone was together. This was experienced in a very different way. Everyone had, you know, it was experienced on Twitter with these little 140 character blips and little video snippets from here and here and everywhere. It was experienced on 1,000 different media platforms. It was experienced on all these different social media platforms. And I think that contributes to this feeling of disunity. That would be my suspicion, is there's this disunity that's built up there. And that may have just reinforced it. So, like today after we put this on the list, I was like, okay, you know, Jordan, you're Joe Biden. You're walking into the Oval Office on your first day. Like, what a challenge. Like, what a broken country. You know, other than Lincoln, like, has there been a worse time to become president of the United States? I guess maybe Roosevelt during the Depression. But, you know, even then, you know, it was one challenge, the economy, right? Like, you know, this is a pandemic, a completely fractured country. These fucking crazy white supremacists that you've got to find a way to get under control. You've got the Trumpism factor. You've got all these different things, plus the economy, plus climate change, plus. And we're putting it all on a 78-year-old man and the team he can assemble to fix it. Like, you know, I know a lot of people watch this. Aren't people of faith? I am. Like, say a prayer for Joe Biden, just for wisdom and peace and hope. Like, you know, the worst that could happen is it's a positive thought in the atmosphere that maybe helps.
Yeah, I mean, if not that I'm any smarter than Joe Biden, but if I'm him, one of the first things I do is I call together some much younger advisors, hopefully who have a background in big tech, and just say, listen, one of the biggest problems we have is that we don't talk to each other anymore. We are in silos, and I don't know what that solution is. Me as a 44-year-old Canadian, but probably not, you know, 70-something Joe Biden as well. I need you to make this a priority. I need you to figure out how we can make this happen. There's not something I'm inching towards here. I have no idea what that is, and I probably can't even conceive of it. But I think you're right. I think that is a big part of the problem, is that not only are the two sides and the two fringes of the sides not talking to each other, they don't believe a word the other side is saying. And
sometimes they don't hear. And they don't hear a word they're saying. Like, I listened to one podcast, and the host was making the point, like, he's a Republican, but not really, not a Trump supporter. but he's on some email chains, and it's like people send him the stuff, and it's like, he'll say, like, you realize this election wasn't stolen, right? Like 66 court cases, 65 of them bore out. There was one that overthrew like 300 votes. Like, it was nothing. There was no electoral fraud, and they're astonished to hear it. Well, of course there was. Like, they've never heard that there wasn't this electoral fraud because the media universe has become so splintered.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this or watching this in BC, and according to our numbers, most of you are from BC, I encourage, like, please, like, seek out a diversity of opinion. You know, you mentioned the Narwhal earlier. I read the Narwhal, read the Tyee, read the Orca, read the Vancouver Sun. You know, listen to different podcasts, listen to the radio. You can make up your own mind, you know what I mean? Yeah. And the more information and the more sources you have, the better. And, it's not a bad thing to hear someone you disagree with. In fact, I would say to you, it's a very good thing. Not only is it more interesting, but even on a purely selfish level, I mean, it might make you better equipped to win the argument next time if you know where they're coming from. So, like, I mean, this should not be something you avoid. Don't just turn your head and run away and plug your ears when somebody says something you disagree with. Listen, they might have a point. Like, God knows I've had my mind changed more times than I can count. And it's not a humbling experience. It's a good experience.
Yeah, no, I agree. So this is a tough topic. Like, this is so far beyond politics. It's a broken system. And like I said, pray for President Biden.
Mm-hmm. We had one or two other things we wanted to talk about that feels like that would be the big closer.
Yeah.
I don't think there's been any official news on the leadership front of the provincial BC Liberals, but I mean, if you've heard anything.
Well, I hear. I think we floated the Gavin Dew story last week. Seems to be gaining momentum. The Dew abides in this race. Another slogan that we can throw out there for him. But yeah, so Gavin, I think he's going to do it, Maclean. Like, I think he's going to do it, and he'll be an interesting candidate because he has a younger network of volunteer, the ones who generally go and power leadership campaigns as a way to get experience and to meet people and learn. He has that network built in, so that could be a very potent force. I also hear that, and this is coming out of Kamloops, that just maybe Todd Stone has cooled off on the idea of running a bit. Now,
really?
I'm not sure. Like, I haven't heard it from, like, I'd like to hear from someone within kind of the Stone sphere, someone tighter into it.
The Stone Circle.
The Stone Circle. Yeah, the Stone Circle. By the way, John Boehner sent out an email condemning what happened, and he sent it out to Boehnerland, which I guess is like all his former aides. This has me like fully in now. Like, every politician, we should have like little names for things. This is great. So the Stone Circle, I like that. But maybe Stone Circle is contemplating. I could be wrong. Like, there's been no rules set out. There's no rush. I think any politician with a brain in their head is going to be in and out and in and out and in and out of this race a few times before they make the decision finally to go. It may just be as simple as, Todd went home and was like, God, I love Kamloops, and it's nice to see my kids, and maybe I don't want to be on the road in Fort St. John, staying overnight and missing out on, a dance competition or something like that my kids are. Like, it could be as simple as that. It could be something more. It could just be, one person's general interpretation of what's going on. So, there you go.
At the risk of sounding like I'm subtweeting someone, and I'm actually not, because there are dozens of examples of this, is that I think we all know of politicians, and it's not even a political thing, but somebody who goes for a promotion, or in this case, runs for leader because they feel like, well, this is the moment, and it's not that they're due, but if they're ever going to do it, that this is the time, and it just feels like the next logical step. But I mean, if you've been up close enough to it, the pace they cut. And I mean, you mentioned being on the road constantly and not seeing your kids. I mean, those are real, and it doesn't matter what party you're talking about. It is a huge, huge commitment. And not only is not everyone cut out for it, not everyone should be cut out for it. I'm not cut out for it. I'm not remotely cut out for it. And so, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing for anyone to express some doubt or hesitancy, because once you're there, and the die has been crossed, and it's much harder to go back than it is to decide not to go in the first place.
Yeah, and then being miserable doesn't help you or anyone else. So,
yeah.
Yeah, so, like, this should be the calculation going on in all these households where people are thinking of running for this. Like, you know, is this the right time? What am I sacrificing? Is that sacrifice worth it? And I'm sure that is the primary conversation. Do you want to close with the backroom news?
Yes. Well, yeah.
Two people we like. We should talk about them.
I almost forgot. These two names, speaking of the BC Liberal leadership race, two of the names that were most prominent in that, Emile Shuffle, who is the party director, and Katie Merrifield, who was the first woman to run a successful leadership campaign, to my knowledge, in provincial politics, but possibly even anywhere in Canada. I don't know that for sure. They both recently landed new gigs here in BC, and, you know, that's good. There needs to be politics is not a forever job. And it's important that when talented people leave it, they find good landing spots, or we'll stop getting talented people in politics. And I mean, I can tell you firsthand that you will be hard pressed to find two more talented people than Emile Shuffle and Katie Merrifield. Yeah,
Emile's top shelf. He went to a firm called Prospectus. I don't know them very well. Gurpreet Vinning, I guess Emile's going to work with Gurpreet, which has a very good track record. So congratulations to him. It's scary, right? Like, you're stepping on your own. Like, he could have stayed as executive director of the party for another year, but wanted to hand over the reins. Now he's doing this. And then Katie, I cannot say enough good things about Katie Merrifield, someone who I just think the world of. She's gone to Wellington Advocacy, which I hadn't heard of Wellington, but I do know some of their other folks. Nick Koolsbergen is sort of the CEO there. And then two of the staffers there, Caitlin Madlin, is their creative director, and Matt Jelness works for them as well. Caitlin and Matt have done stuff for ICBA in the past. They are really rock solid, good people, smart, creative, talented. Katie's going to love them. Katie's going to fit right in there. So if you're looking for the big up and coming advocacy presences in BC, non-NDP versions, I would bet on Wellington. I think they're a very talented team there.
Absolutely. And if you're watching this saying, grumbling that, connected insiders getting good jobs, trust me, when this current government leaves office, whenever it is, 3 years or longer, the very talented people running it right now will also be looking for very good jobs. And it's important that they find them too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, just because you work for a political party doesn't mean you should never work again. Like, that's crazy. So It's the exact opposite. Look, the United States is different. The United States, like, campaigning, you could be a full-time campaigner. We're talking about billion-dollar campaigns now, presidencies. I think $800 million was spent in Georgia just on those two Senate runoffs. So, you can go from campaign to campaign like a bit of a vagabond or mercenary. You can't do that in Canada. You have to have real work in order to supplement what you do.
Absolutely. And so that, I don't know if it's happy retirement to those two, but, possibly. Until then, I don't think, I don't have nothing else unless you have something else you want to cover before we go.
Oh, we've talked enough, I think.
We have. Well, that's always true. We've talked enough. Until then, he's Jordan Bateman. My name is Maclean K. Until next week, happy politics.